The Winter Tree by Georgina Lewis. Read by Jill Greenacre. Chapter 7. The Break. They rang a peal for Hester on her wedding day. George Pascoe, Harry Tugala, Perrin and the other ringers. A peal for Hester and for David Penkeven. The wedding was a wedding, as weddings go, and that's really all you could say about it. Lissy in her green dress looked plump and pleasant and proud, with well-scrubbed cheeks and shining freckled face. My mother, round and Sundayish in her best blue silk and a new hat. My father in his suit, with hair freshly trimmed so close it looked as if it could be rubbed off altogether by a determined wind. Perrin as usher, stern and unfamiliar. Harry Tugala as best man, looking taller than ever beside David's slightness. Mother sniffed, and Lissy threatened to sneeze at the proximity of the bridal bouquet, then changed her mind with admirable control. Father gave away the bride and tapped absently upon invisible strings in the organ passages. David, young and fair and handsome in his new suit, with a carnation in his buttonhole, fidgeted with his collar and everlastingly straightened his tie. And Joseph wasn't even there. Hester was suitably radiant, bright-eyed but pale of cheek. She seemed to me to be in a kind of trance, as if everything going on around her was enjoyable and pleasant, but really nothing to do with her. She moved down the church on my father's arm to David, like an actress playing the part of a bride, and David was like one of the props, useful, undeniably handsome in his crisp white shirt and blue wedding suit, pale hair rippling smoothly back from a dependable hairline and youthful brow, part of the equipment of every good wedding. He stepped smartly forward before the vicar to receive his bride. Hester moved to his side and gazed ahead of her, her luminous eyes fixed with a curious blankness upon the great rose window, ablaze with morning sunshine above the altar, and Lissy brought up the rear. The vicar intoned the words of the marriage service with severe and sober emphasis upon the sacred vows. The performers replied with voices low and hardly audible, and I waited for Mother to cry. Lissy, shifting from leg to leg in her green dress, stood at the regulation distance, held the bride's bouquet and stifled another sneeze. David held the ring on Hester's finger while he repeated the magic words, and the vicar blessed them. And there. It was done, and they were man and wife. Mother dug me gently in the ribs with her elbow. "Here, Abby, I didn't even cry," she whispered proudly. "How about that, my girl? I can never manage to keep a dry eye at a wedding, can I? But I did today." I was not quite sure whether this was a salute to Mother's self-control, or whether it was due to a singular lack of anything of emotional significance during the service. But I nodded with admiration and gave her what I hoped with a cheering smile. After the happy couple had left the church, the ringers, with a kind of desperate determination to make the day memorable, set about the peal. They gathered round the tower steps and rubbed their hands together. "Come on, lads," said George buoyantly. "We'd better get up there and see what we can do for 'em. Sorry you can't be with us, Garfield. You'll have to tell us how the striking sounds from home this time." Father shrugged and looked as if he'd much prefer the tower if it was up to him. George chuckled to himself, caught Lissy's eye and winked. She tiptoed shyly up to him and held out the flowers. George nodded. "Lovely, aren't they?" he said approvingly. "Is that the bride's bunch?" Lissy lifted her chin. "Bouquet," she corrected him. "Hester's. She's given it to me." "You'll be the next bride then, won't you?" said Harry Tugala jovially. "You'll have to marry my Toby, then I can be your daddy-in-law. A fine great girl like you. I'd marry you myself, only I'm married already." Lissy giggled and scraped her toe and went pink. Then the men tensed their shoulders and flexed their arms and turned to their real business as the vicar closed the vestry door and came towards them in his cassock. They all disappeared into the tower stair with much subdued scuffling of feet on stone. Father followed them, with assurances to us that he would be home directly, in 10 minutes, just to ring a few warm-up touches with them first, whatever that meant. Lissy fell into step with me. I felt Thomas's hand slip into mine. I looked down at him, pale head bent earnestly over a sheet of paper. "What is it?" I whispered. "What have you been writing?" "He's been drawing," Lissy said. "Show her, Thomas. Oh, Abby, they're awful good. He drew pictures in the service." And he held up small sketches of a hymn book, Mother's hands, and Lissy's bunch of flowers. There in the nave, the bell music came down dimly to us through the roof. We moved towards the door. Then we were out in the sunshine, and there they stood together, being photographed. The bride and groom, side by side, and over them stole a look of vague disquiet, of slight embarrassment, as if they wondered quite how it had all come about. Above our heads, the bell notes fell noisily from the tower. On the flagstone path around the porch, a huddled group of coloured figures moved about a swirl of bridal white. Someone, Veronica I think, threw a handful of confetti, and then others were throwing it too, and there was scattered laughter and good wishes and shy hugs for Hester. Mother was kissing her on a pale cheek. "Good luck, my love," I heard her whisper, and I saw her squeeze David's arm. "Take care of her," she said. "She needs plenty of patience, does my Hester, plenty of love." I saw David nod earnestly and shake her hand. We all went back to the cottage for the wedding breakfast, as David's parents called it. All of us trailing down the lane with the bells pealing about us and Hester and David leading the way, her hand upon his arm. Hester waved and smiled at passers-by and looked radiantly bride-like, and David gave his handsome, boyish smile. We all crowded into the living room. Father, when he joined us, passed round borrowed glasses of his most venerable wine, and even Lissy and the boys were allowed a watered drop. The boys were a bit of a problem. The three of them made a dive for the mysterious hollow under the table where the food had been put out on little dishes, and nudged and kicked each other unnervingly all through the proceedings. They left the food alone, Father saw to that, but the excitement of it all proved too much for them, and several times I heard Polly Tregulla threatening Toby with a stick if he didn't calm down a bit and behave. Harry was ringing in the peal, or I think he would have given it to him there and then. Thomas was the calmest of the three. His placid nature was not easily ruffled. But Jim Penkevin, slightly younger by a few months, was something of a handful. After the sip of watered wine, he became quite aggressive and spent most of his time inciting Toby and Thomas to fight. His parents took little notice, perhaps because it was normal behaviour for him, but I saw Mother and Father exchange a look which plainly said they were thankful that Thomas, at least, could be trusted to behave himself. I got caught in a corner by David's mother and father. His mother made veiled allusions to the peculiar colour of the cake icing, a thing which seemed to worry her more than Hester's blankness. During the ensuing speeches, when David was referred to as her husband, there was a slightly awkward moment as Hester continued to frown in a vaguely puzzled way, looking around her as if searching for someone else. David, standing beside her, nudged her sheepishly, and her face cleared, but an odd expression that seemed to me like a breath of fear had been there for a moment. Then she laughed rather suddenly and jerkily, and everyone else laughed with her. "Tell me," said Mrs. Penkevin, sipping carefully at Father's wine, "tell me, Abigail, why green?" "Green?" I echoed, my eyes still on Hester, now that the laughter had stopped and everyone was listening politely to what Father was saying in praise of paraffin for eradicating woodworm in garden tool handles, had gone very pale. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "I was asking you, my dear," said Mrs. Penkevin, "why green for the bridesmaid? It seems such a pagan sort of colour somehow at a Christian wedding." I don't know about that," I said. "It's just that it's Hester's favourite colour. She wanted a green wedding dress too, but she had to make do with a green bridesmaid instead." I thought they might laugh, but Mrs. Penkevin looked a little alarmed. "Tell me some more about Hester. She's not actually your sister, is she? More of a cousin, I understand, from your mother's side?" "No, from Father's." "Oh, his younger sister's daughter. And her father?" There was an awkward pause, and I said lamely, "We don't keep in very close touch with father's family, I'm afraid. They live so far away, you see." "Good heavens, child, how fascinating. I didn't realise you had relatives abroad. You must tell me more. Where are they exactly? America?" No," I said. "Up country somewhere. Bristol, I think, or Wales. I don't know much about them, really." "Oh," she said, and her face fell. "But surely you must know the family history. What happened to Hester's parents? I understand she's lived with you since childhood." "I'm afraid I don't really know anything," I said. "You'll have to ask father to tell you about his family. Does it matter?" She seemed to hesitate and gave me a rather strange look. Then she said quickly, "Well, naturally we'd like to know a little more about our new daughter-in-law. David himself seems to know almost nothing about her background. But then, young love is blind, isn't it?" She shook her husband's arm. "Isn't it, dear?" David's father, who seemed to have realised at last that the ear-splitting shrieks coming from beneath the dining-room table had their origin in his son, turned a preoccupied eye upon his wife and said, "What's that, my dear?" "Hester," Mrs. Penkevin was saying. "I was asking Abigail about Hester. I was saying, dear, that it would be unfriendly of us not to want to know a little more about her, wouldn't it?" Oh, yes, indeed. Pretty girl, Hester. Your cousin, Abigail, I hear. Lovely-looking girl." He sipped appreciatively at the wine. "Quite a cracker. This wine's very good. What is it? Spanish? A Sauterne?" "No, his father's own. It's parsnip." "Good Lord, is it really? It's very good." "I was saying, dear, that green seems a peculiar colour for wedding cake icing. Don't you think so?" "Green? Sorry, dear. What are we talking about? Green icing on the cake? Yes, it looks very pretty, doesn't it? Very nice. Strange? No, I don't think so. Not at all. Rather unusual. Very pleasant. I'm a little worried about James, my dear. He's making rather a mess under the table with crumbs." Oh, Mother won't mind crumbs," I said cheerfully. "Don't worry about that. She's used to crumbs." "Really?" said Mrs. Penkevin with slight distaste. She began to poke about under the table. "James, come out from there. Where are your manners, James?" I caught sight of Mother signalling frantically from the kitchen to help her cut more sandwiches, and I left them to it. And while I sliced and buttered and grated cheese, a moment came back to me. A moment earlier outside the church, when the newlyweds were posing for the photographs. Suddenly, across the small knot of people, I had caught Hester's eye. She had given me her tight little smile and then quickly looked down. I saw her bite her lower lip very slightly, as if the thought had crossed her mind, as it had mine, that we would never again be quite so close as friends. Separated forever from our childhood by her new estate, her closest one would be David now. I found it strangely difficult to see Hester in the role of David's wife. A little later, across the heads of smiling faces, she had caught my eye again and beckoned me over to them. I shook hands with David, who gripped my fingers with a clasp of deep sincerity and smiled into my eyes. "Good to see you, Abigail. Doesn't Hester look wonderful? I hear you made her dress. Splendid piece of work. My mother was very much admiring it." I nodded and smiled back as warmly as I could manage. "Yes, she looks lovely." He turned away to shake hands with equal sincerity with someone else, and Hester whispered to me, "It really is a lovely dress, Abby. I'm glad now that I had white." "Are you happy, Hester?" I asked her. "Oh, yes, I'm happy," she said brightly. And then, in an odd, flat little voice, so low that no one else could hear, "He didn't come at all, did he?" I stared at her, but she turned away and began to smile at something else David was saying, her face composed in loveliness. But I shivered involuntarily, and I felt cold for them both, for the years and years of loneliness pressing in upon them both if David could not reach across to her and make her love him. She stood there, a beautiful, well-grown woman, slender and vivid in the early sunshine, and I wondered just what the future held for her, my little lost sister, and for David too. And it crossed my mind also to wonder how on earth anyone ever had the courage to get married at all. For several weeks following the wedding, our routine at home struggled a little, adjusting to life without Hester. Perrin and Thomas and Lizzie kept us busy. Lizzie and Thomas went to school as usual, and Perrin and I went to work, but all day the strange knowledge was with us all that Hester would not be there when we got home in the evenings. Mother said it felt quite empty at home without her during the day. She said she found herself pottering about quite listlessly, until Father came home on his bicycle in the evenings from the farm where he put in a few hours a week. She pined for Hester's company and felt a little lost without the extra chores that her presence had meant. Personally, I missed her very much. It seemed quite strange without her. I thought of her constantly and wondered how she and David were settling down to married life. I had got myself a job at Mrs. Blamey's shop in the village on leaving school, and it was an odd feeling to walk home through the narrow main street after a day of selling sweets and tobacco and baked beans and washing powders to people who asked me constantly how Hester was, knowing that she would not be there when I got home. We had little news of her to go on. She wrote letters to Mother and included me in them, but they told us very little. We wrote back with all the news that we could think of, mostly about the garden and Thomas's doing at school, and asked her questions that she never answered. Veronica Brays began to frequent the shop. I grew used to seeing her tailored shape entering the doorway during the afternoon. She came nearly every day to buy something, and the conversation inevitably turned to Hester and David. Her appetite for news of them seemed insatiable. "Afternoon, Abby. Lovely day, isn't it? I suppose you'll have had post this week, won't you? Another letter from Hester, no doubt. Getting on all right, are they? I'll have a tin loaf today, Abby. Enjoying their honeymoon with David's auntie, are they? I'll have a dozen of those splits too. Look nice, they do. We're having a few friends from the Young Wives Club to tea today. I'd be a member, of course, if I were married." She giggled and went red. "David's wife would have joined, wouldn't she, if she'd have been living here in the village? What a pity they've moved so far away." "Not so far, really," I said. "It's not as if they've gone somewhere like Scotland or London." Veronica ran her hand along the counter and fingered it thoughtfully. "Seen them, have you, since the wedding?" "No," I said, "but Hester writes." "That's a nice dress you've got on today, Abby. Almost makes you look a bit slimmer, it do. Happy, are they?" "Why, yes, I believe so," I answered. I thought of Hester's rambling letters about the weather and the daffodils in the park, and her multitude of questions about the village and the garden at home, letters which told us absolutely nothing about her happiness, and even less about David's. David had got a job, she wrote, selling vegetables in a shop in Truro, and liked it very much. She said after the country it was different living in a town. She supposed she should really say city, but she was a bit lonely and had made no friends yet. David had made a new friend, a young chap of same age who worked in a butcher's nearby. Such a huge chap it's a wonder he could get in at the door, but useful to get all that muscle behind a meat axe. She was making me a pair of green gloves for Christmas with white stars on the back of them, and a scarf for Lizzie, also green. She hoped we were well at home, and to tell Perrin to thank the ringers for the peel and to give her love to all of us from Hester. It was written in her large, childish handwriting, with frequent crossings out and an extraordinary way of spelling that was hers alone. Mother had folded the letter and sighed, and looked at me with vague dissatisfaction. "She sounds so homesick, Abby, don't she?" She pinched her top lip thoughtfully. "Do you suppose they're having enough to eat, my handsome?" "I should think so," I had said, laughing. "Oh dear, Mother, you'd solve the whole world's troubles with a good square meal if you could." "And why not?" she said indignantly, not seeing the funny side of it. "There's need enough of good food in this world, with all those poor starving little children in foreign parts." "Mother," I said, "I'm perfectly sure they'll be getting enough to eat. Hester's a good cook. Why, you've taught her almost all you know yourself. And if they run out of ideas, they can always live on pasties and old vegetables." She had looked at me sideways, knowing I was mocking her, but laughed with me, suddenly exploding into a girlish giggle that I hadn't heard for years, not since Hester had come to live with us. and Father had heard us laughing in the kitchen and had come in to make sure we hadn't been at his wine. Reassured, he shuffled absently out again and went back to tuning up his violin. He'd been putting a new string on it, and it kept slipping on the peg, so that a very strange descending note would suddenly issue forth in the middle of a scale. Then Father would stop playing suddenly and click with irritation, and that had set Mother and me both off chuckling again. After a while we heard him flip-flapping up the brick path to his shed in the orchard to get a bit of peace. It was a happy moment. Looking back, a certain vague tension seemed to have lifted with Hester's departure. But although it was nice to be ourselves again, I sorely missed her and her sweet and odd ways.